Hello and welcome to the Go Narrative stream. It is a Friday. It is end of January, January the 20th. Where has the month gone? Welcome and excited to be here today with you to talk about and illuminate some ideas around the types of story that we tell. I heard a fantastic quote this week, and when I heard it, the person I heard it from, I was like, wow, that's fantastic. Did he get that from somewhere else? And I immediately went search for it, and it seems that Keith Tare has actually coined this fantastic quote that I absolutely am going to be using. And his quote was said in front of a graduation ceremony in Canterbury, in England, where Keith, who went to the same university that I did, was bestowed upon him an honorary doctorate. Easy for me to say. Keith and I both serve on the board of a charity here in the US for our university, as Americans say, the alma mater, if you will. And we help raise money to send a Fulbright scholar from the US over to study at our old stomping grounds. Well, we had our quarterly board meeting this week, and Keith was on the call, and we talked about this fantastic experience that he had. And I went and had a look at the YouTube of his speech. And in his speech, he said a couple of really fantastic things. But the one thing I want to share with you today is an idea is only as good as the story you tell about it. I think that bears a moment of pondering and even some repetition. An idea is only as good as the story you tell about it. You've probably thought about this concept of why, what, how, who, where, when, right? My five best friends and how, as my late father used to refer to them. And we often use them in business to break down a problem that we're seeking to solve. I want to focus on three of those right now: why, how, and what. And it's in direct relation to Keith's quote. Why, how, and what? Why do we do what we do? How do we go about doing it? And what do we deliver? Now, that why is pretty stable. That why comes from the whole of you, right? Your experiences, your growing up, your career, your family, your friends, the travel that you may have done. All of those things fuel this core of who you are, this why, if you will. And in fact, as a certified coach of the Why Institute, it's something that I inevitably find myself thinking about all the time. And there's a whole nother story about the Why Institute and why I chose to get involved with it. And it's because of what I'm talking about now. And that's this idea of why that then translates through action and process and all the things that we do to then deliver a what. Now, the how and the what aren't necessarily as perennial as the why, but whatever our why is, we channel that through the things that we do and ultimately deliver something. An idea is only as good as the story we tell about it. Where do the ideas live in most of our lives? They tend to live in the how and the what space. How should we do this? Should we use this tool? Where should we go? What is the approach? Who has done this before, and how did they approach it? And then, of course, what do we want to get? Do we want to reduce, increase, improve, speed up? What is it that we're trying to do in our life or in our business? And of course, in business, a lot of that is about optimization, finding new ways of doing things, improving results. So the what is a very strong part of this idea concept. And if you find yourself in a situation where you know very specifically what you need, then you go and hunt for it. In fact, this week we started a fantastic new partnership, and a part of that required us actually changing and upgrading our company insurance. Now, it turned out that we needed a very specific type of insurance for this partnership. And in fact, it seems like a good idea to have that specific angle anyway. It's all about cyber security and privacy, something that's incredibly important for all of us nowadays. Now, I knew that I needed it. I knew the what, it was very clear. So I was hunting very specifically. I was looking for the features and benefits, if you will, of that insurance. And in my search, both with our standard broker and some other brokers, and using our friend Google or Bing, I was looking for what not only the features were, but the price, how soon could I get it started, all those details, right? All the functional aspects of the what, and even some of the how. But I knew the how was also pretty much set. Here's the thing. The reason why I was in that situation is because of the story that came before it. Even the most technical of products, even the most specific of features that you find yourself hunting for or selling, even the most specific of features come from somewhere. And that somewhere is this idea of why. And the best way to communicate a why is through story. Now, it just so happens that stories aren't just all about cupcakes and rainbows. They are a delivery mechanism for information. So they're a delivery information for the how and for the what. In my story with this partnership, I became aware of the what. And of course, that was related to the how of the project and the partnership. So I knew what I was going to be looking for. Okay, right. So an idea is only as good as the story we tell about it. Keith, thank you so much for that quote. I absolutely love it and will be using it all the time. What does this mean to you as a business leader? Whether you're a formal business leader today or you have aspirations to run your own company or run a division at the company you're in, or have your sight set on a company that you respect, that's doing something great, a why that you respect and you want to be involved in and you want to help lead that company. Or you might find yourself leading from below, but you are a leader that's hunting for ways to be more effective. As you go through your day, as you plan out the activities that you're doing for the week, the day, the week, the month, even the year, how are you communicating with those around you about those different elements? How are you talking about the why? How are you talking about the what? How are you talking about the how? There's something in storytelling which I work very hard to shield you all from as business people. And that is the hero's journey. It's Hollywood. It's Christopher Booker's 7 basic plots and a variety of other, shall we say, specialist storytelling topics that you don't have time for, right? Because you've got your business to worry about. You've got those plans for the day, the week, the year. But you have recognized the importance of storytelling and you want to be able to harness it. So that's why you're listening or reading this, right? So if we look at any given day, you're going to be telling a story. Now, what you might be tempted to do if you're trying to bring some structure to that, trying to get your hands around it, trying to control it a little bit, right? Because either we control something, or we, within reason, either we control something or we kind of leave it up to other people, right? Delegation. would be another example, right? We either do it ourselves or we don't do it, we delegate it. There's all sorts of productivity techniques that talk about this, right? David Allen's Getting Things Done, for example. So if you're going to be telling the story and owning it so that you have some level of control, right? You can shape it. And then if it's good enough, the people you tell it to will then echo the essence of that story at the very least, and it will then spread. You might think to yourself, I'm going to go out and I'm going to try and figure out which one of these kind of stories should I be telling? And it's very natural, right? I warn you, fair warning, it's a rabbit hole. And in fact, it's a rabbit hole that I started getting into 10 years ago and rapidly found that business needed a different approach to storytelling, right? Business people need to focus on their business, and then they need to use these various tools to then achieve whatever they're going to achieve. It could be a method, like David Allen's Getting Things Done, or it could be storytelling, or it could be any other number of things that you're doing, from project planning and management to training techniques to motivation techniques, you name it, right? So if you were to go out and have a look at the types of story out there, you'd find a couple of models. And so I'll touch on these briefly just to give you the context, but you don't have to worry about remembering or remembering all the details. So one of the models is that there's three types of story: the little Taylor story, the boy meets girl story, or whatever kind of configuration, human meets other human, and there's some type of attraction involved, and there's a person learns a lesson, right? So there's been work done to say, hey, look, all stories fit into these three types. Now, Christopher Booker wasn't really happy with that. He felt like there was a little bit more breadth, a little bit more breathing room, a little bit more granularity, shall we say, to the types of stories that are out there. And if you start to look at the little Taylor one, for example, some of his stories start to map to that. So one of Christopher Booker's types is rags to riches. So you could arguably say the little Taylor is rags to riches, or you could say it's somebody becomes rich and famous, or the morals of hard work. Okay, so there's all sorts of wonderful detail that you can bring into it when you use the guiding light of the little Taylor. The same goes for Christopher Booker's types, of which rags to riches are one. There's also overcoming the monster, kind of somewhat self-explanatory, right? Defeating some type of evil force that's threatening the status quo, or the happiness or the safety of a country or a people, or whatever happens to be, overcoming that monster. Then there's rebirth, the complete change, learning something, for example, that has results in a sea change in approach in how you see the world, and whatever the details happen to be, but this kind of concept of being reborn. There's quest, which is this idea of going somewhere to get something, right? To acquire an object, right? Going up the mountain to get the stone tablets, or getting the lightsaber. In fact, there's a little bit of a similarity in some relationship between how Booker then talks about journey and return, which tends to be about learning a lesson rather than getting an object, but you can start to bring these together. Again, you're not writing books, you're not making movies, so you don't have to worry about the specifics of all this. I'm just kind of giving you a general lay of the land. And then there's, we mentioned the rags to riches. And then, of course, there's the two that you'll be instantly familiar with, and that's tragedy and comedy. The tragedy is the main character has got some type of flaw that they never managed to overcome, and you watch it and it's just like a train wreck, right? And then a comedy is similar, but there's a triumph over that adversity, and there's often a humorous way that it's delivered. So people throughout time have been trying to figure out, what are these frameworks, so that I can then go and I can apply those frameworks. And the intent there was writing literature or making movies and so on. But you're not doing that. You're not writing books or making movies. So what type of story are you telling? What type of story do you need to be telling right now? And your story isn't necessarily going to be just one thing. Remember how we touched on there's some similarities between the quest and the journey and return. There's some overlap, right? It's very common. If you look at a comedy, for example, there could be elements of a quest in that comedy. You could even take a movie like Spaceballs, right, which is a comedy but is also a quest. And so there is this kind of mashing up that can happen. But in general, there's a dominant story that you need to be telling right now to have the kind of impact that you want on your business, right? The why of what we're trying to do to bring to the world, the impact we're trying to have, how we're going about doing that is part of that is how we are telling the story about the idea, the what that we're ultimately delivering to the world. And so you can see how all these things come together. So I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail right now about all the potential different story types that you can tell. I'm going to focus on just one, and then in the coming weeks, we'll also talk about the others. And I would love to hear your feedback. I would love to hear your stories, to be honest. If the story type, the theme, the sort of characterization of that theme resonates with you, leave a note in the comments, reach out, email gnhelp@gonarrative.com and let us know what it is. Would love to hear your story. Should come as no surprise that here at Go Narrative, we are story junkies. So thinking about what type of story that you could tell, one of those types of stories is in orbit around how people perceive us, right? And so today, thinking about the dominant story type that relates to that, I do want to make a little side comment on the what's below dominant and below that. So you've got your dominant story that you're trying to communicate, this general theme that you're working on, that you're using as a framework to put your ideas in to help you tell your story. And there is that dominant story, but there's also supporting elements, supporting story, other things that feed into that. And just like I said, we've got these areas of overlap. And then there's also an influencing. What are the other influencing aspects that are still have some bearing on the story you're trying to tell, but maybe aren't quite as loud as the supporting, and definitely not as loud as the dominant? So let's look at a topic, right? Let's look at an area of business. That's what this is all about, telling stories that can move your business forward, telling stories that can give you the access to your markets and your people, your partners, in a way that is going to inspire them to act. And we deal with different problems in business, so that it makes the most sense for us to think about a certain topic or a certain area of business. And when we kind of sit down and look at that, we can kind of break it down, right? And there's certain things that really pop up that have a golden thread through several different topics that are all very related. Today, I want to have you ask yourself a few questions. Have you, for example, recently made a big improvement to your product or your service because of some negative feedback from the market? Maybe there's some complaints, right? Kind of, if you got to push that a bit further on the extreme, negative reviews, complaints, maybe there's been quality issues that have surfaced that you've realized. Some type of legitimate negative reviews about your product or service as well that you're seeing a trend on, and you're working hard to fix that, right? So what does that entail? If we distill it down to just a couple of things, one is we got to fix this problem, right? If we don't fix the problem, it doesn't matter if we kind of mitigate some of the negativity that's out there in the world, because the problem's still going to exist. So the what of what we have to do is to fix that problem. How we do it is going to include a couple of things, right? Including how we start to communicate about that. And so that's the second part, right? An idea is only as good as the story you tell about it. So if an idea is only as good as the story you tell about it, what type of story would you tell your customers, your partners, your sales teams to make sure that they have what they need to represent your company and the why and the changes to the what that have been made, and of course ultimately to the market, your customers, and that is where where it all lands ultimately. So if we look at those things, it's like, well, how are we going to approach that? What type of story are we going to tell? It's going to be quite specific, right? It's going to be about changing perception, right? We fix the problem. How do we change this perspective? How do we change a perspective that's out there? It's the nice guy who was misunderstood, right? Or the gal who put her foot in it and has to work to get people to realize that she wasn't really that bad, right? And she's learned, she's grown, right? And so now she wants to have people recognize that she's a better person, that she's actually an ally or a friend or whatever it happens to be, right? Just things that we might have experienced in our own lives. You're rooting for people in these stories, right? We're rooting for you, right? If you've made a mistake with your product and you've identified it and you're responding to customer complaints and you've improved the product, like most people in their right minds are going to throw you a bone, right? They're going to give you at least a second chance. And if you think about that kind of idea of becoming a better person, you can think about the idea of becoming a better company or becoming a better brand, right? And there's the efforts that you need to do to bring people on board. So the type of story that you're going to be telling in this case is going to be something, if we were to kind of connect it back to some of those other story types, right? The entertainment story types, that might look like Rebirth, for example, right? About changing one's ways, about your image and how you get people to see differently about your image. And in fact, the tailor, right? The idea of if we were to characterize this, it's the tailor. If we were to characterize this type of story, it's actually one of those three types, right? And there is a direct connection there that really resonates. Another metaphor, if you will, could be a stylist or a decorator. But I like the idea of a tailor, and I'll tell you why. Now, I'm not wearing a suit right now, but if I had a need to wear a suit and I wanted to get a new suit, I didn't want to just take something off the shelf and run the risk of, hey, my arms don't quite, match up to the body type that this particular brand's, style is. But I like the suit, and if I go to a shop in the US like Nordstrom, or if you go to, there's even, there's Savile Row in London, where you would actually go and get that suit tailored to you. Right? But why will you do that? Well, you have to look at the motivation, the why, right? Maybe you've got that graduation ceremony. Maybe you're receiving an honorary doctorate and you want to look your absolute best, right? You want to portray a certain image, okay? Now, to be fair, if you had a product problem that you fixed and you're working to tailor a new image, arguably there's a lot more that you need to work on and a lot more that needs to happen than just looking good in a certain situation. And that's because between you and me, my friend, all metaphors do have a certain point where they start to break down. But this idea of tailoring that image, you can also look at some other aspects of business that could result in the need to tell this story. Maybe there's been some type of damage to your reputation that's not just product related, right? Maybe you're a brand who had a relationship with a spokesperson for that brand or a partnership, and maybe that spokesperson went off and did something terrible, right? Think about that for a second. How are you as a brand going to mitigate that, right? Maybe you're a sportswear company, okay? If anybody's reading between the lines here, you can probably figure out the general one that's going on in the world here. So maybe you're a sportswear company, okay? And you are working to distance yourself from this negative influence, this negative impact on your brand. You want to repair your reputation. So you look at the why, the what, and the how, and you say, why? Why? Well, this is what we stand for. Okay, it's not that, it's this. And how we go about doing that in the world is we do these things and then we deliver this stuff, right? You know, t-shirts, shoes, sponsorships, programs. And some of those are hows and some of those are whats. So now we find ourselves in the leadership team at that sportswear company. And we decide that we're actually going to invest in some programs that are counter to the negative, right? So maybe there's a diversity program or underserved communities that we can invest in and we can help, right? And is there a quid pro quo there? Of course, right? There's a company that is trying to make money and trying to repair its image so we can still keep making money. And there's an investment in a community that can benefit in some way. And as long as that's done with good intent, I don't see any problem with that. Because it's not really just a quid pro quo. It's not even just a win-win. It's a 1 + 1 = 3. And so in this case, you decide to do that. You also need to figure out how you're going to talk about it. And so the type of story there, if you were to start thinking about it, would be, how are we going to tailor our new suit so that we can give the right impression to the world about who we are and what we stand for? So that could be another area that this type of story could benefit from. And this example that we've just gone through might be considered to be rather dramatic. Maybe you're a smaller business. Maybe you're one of the many AI companies that are forging ahead with this fantastic what of AI, and maybe there's been some type of abuse of your technology, and you are having to change the perceptions of your reputation. Again, a bit different to a product flaw, unless it was a product flaw. But again, we're in the same realm, right? The same type of story, the same type of business problem that needs a certain type of framework. And so when you think about that, you can say, okay, we're going to focus on tailoring that suit. And it doesn't have to be the big corporation example and a celebrity. It could be smaller things as well. Here's another idea. Maybe your best efforts to communicate who you are, even if maybe you've even tried implementing storytelling and it's just not working. Maybe an aspect to this was a change to your business, right? So a really great example, if you look at the tech industry over the past decade, is the shift from the on-premises solutions to the cloud solutions, and then the hybrid solutions, and all of the technology that comes along with that, from content delivery networks to edge solutions, security, all of these different pieces. Now, let's say that you are a company that's established in one of those specific areas. Maybe it's security, for example. And maybe you've grown. Maybe you had an acquisition, or maybe you developed something new. You figured out a new what that can really help, but it's not security. Probably adjacent to security. There's probably some relevance to that, right? But it's not what people know you for. Now, this isn't a product flaw issue. This isn't technically like a reputation, especially if you think about bad reputation issue. It's an issue of what people understand your company to be, right? Because a brand, just like where the term came from, like the cowboys with the hot metal branding the backside of their cow, so everybody knew whose cattle and whose herd that ultimately belonged to. A brand communicates more about what that company is, and that if it needs to shift, you need to think about how you're going to do that. You need to think about the fact the suit's not fitting anymore, and you need to approach that situation. You need to tailor that suit. You need to do something different with that suit. You know, you could have a big old suit from a family member that you love that's just not quite right. Take it to a tailor and work with them to have it tailored, and you have that family heirloom that can fit you, right? So you're just not confident that you've done enough, right? Maybe there's some customer feedback that you've received. Maybe your partners have given you some feedback. Maybe you're just not seeing the business impact you expected and that your business models have predicted. And you know that you need to do more to show your customers what you can do for them with this new thing, with this shift, with this change, and why you're a great choice for it, right? The suit, that's good. You know, I keep going back to that analogy because it's got some good legs on it, right? The job interview would be another potential scenario where a suit might be required. And in that situation, coming across as the best choice is something that your suit could potentially contribute to. And of course, the metaphor of the suit here, even in the job interview situation, is a metaphor for putting forth something, right? And that's because we're talking about story types, we're talking about themes, and we're talking about the characterization of those themes. This doesn't mean that you're necessarily the tailor, right? You could go to the tailor, but the idea of a tailor, the essence of a tailor, the act of tailoring, and the fact that that act is done by a human being, right? Makes me think of the fact we mentioned AI, and eventually some stuff won't be done by human beings, even today. I think tailoring might be one of those ones, along with maybe plumbing and electricians. It takes a long time for robots to take complete control over. There's actually some research that's been done about that as well. Not the tailor aspect, but the plumbing and the electrician one. So there we go. You are looking at your business, you're looking at a business problem, you're looking at what you need to do, you've identified it, you figured out the big idea, and an idea is only as good as the story you tell about it. You know, as we work to do better as companies and to become better as people, that also affects the businesses that we spend our time and energy investing in, just like you're doing as a business leader. And sometimes that involves changing our ways, right? And the risk is that if a tree falls in the woods and nobody is there to hear it, does it make a sound? Which is quite adjacent to Keith Tear's quote about ideas and stories, right? We need to change perceptions. There could be a million different reasons why, but we need to change perceptions. If that's you, fantastic. If that's you today, fantastic. Now, it might not be you today, but it might be you tomorrow, or in a month, or in a year. So I want you to go away today, and I want you to keep your ears open for the stories that are out there that relate to this type. Because the types of story that we tell in business are directly related to what happens in business. And therefore, any story type is going to be a divining rod for us to find those types of stories. So go out there, figure out one of these stories that's going on, right? Not even your own company, right? Look at the press, look at social media, look at what other people are saying. Can you see one of those stories? If you can, let me know. Again, GN, Go Narrative, gnhelp@gonarrative.com. Love to hear what your observations are. Likewise, if you're trying to tell this type of story, let us know. How have you tried to approach it? What are you thinking about, right? That how, right? How, the process. How are you trying to approach it? What are you doing about it? Is a part of that what, how you communicate and talk about it, right? So an idea is only as good as the story you tell about it. So let's get you telling the right story for the business problem that you have right now, today, that one story. You don't even need to worry about what's our big strategic narrative, off over the coming years. The one story that you need to be telling right now. Thank you so much for connecting in today, for watching live, watching the recording, watching our cut downs, reading our blog on this topic. Stay tuned, because there's more story types to come, and I'm super excited to share them with you. And in the meantime, if this whole story type doesn't resonate, but you are itching to try and tell a new story, let us know what your business problem is that you're trying to deal with, and we can help point you in the right direction for the type of story that you should be telling. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful Friday. Have a wonderful weekend. Thank you from all your friends at Go Narrative, and story onward. Cheers. Bye for now.